всіх присутніх учасників. Тема сьогоднішньої
We are starting. Welcome all the participants. We have today wonderful lectures with us, Mr. Will Barnes, United States Army retired, U.S. Army chaplain, and Colonel Lee from the National Guard of Maryland. The setting of our today's meeting is 1 hour of lecture and half an hour for Q&A session. To ask a question, you can either write it down in the chat or you can raise your hand and voice it out to our presenters. Everyone can listen to the lecture either in the original English language or to use the simultaneous interpreting, which you have in your panel at the bottom. Please go to the globe sign and choose the respective channel. We can start.
Okay, let me introduce myself. I'm Jim Martin, faculty member at Bryn Mawr College in the United States and a retired Army officer. We're honored today to have 2 of my colleagues present to you about the role of the chaplain in the context of military operations. But I want to begin by simply saying that we want to honor Ukraine, yesterday being your Independence Day, and we want to honor all of those who have given their life and others who have sacrificed their physical and psychological well-being, and also to honor the caregivers who are trying to support your military members. It's important for us that, we've had a chance to follow the work of chaplains in Ukraine as it's been reported in the Western press. And we're honored here to recognize the Ukrainian clergy in this war and to share some thoughts from the experiences of the American military. We recognize that we bring a U.S. perspective from our own experiences that may differ in many ways to your own. We only hope that we can help to stimulate some ideas and some discussion so that you can find your own answers and best practices in supporting your military operations. It's important for us to highlight that in the United States, America's military clergy support the spiritual needs of our soldiers of all faiths, offering counseling, leading religious services, administering the sacraments. Chaplains are a source of strength and hope. Often they can be found on the front lines of battle, typically experiencing the same hardships and dangers as the regular troops, including the chaos of battle, deaths, and grievous injuries. Chaplains provide a caring presence that offers comfort and hope. Military chaplains, as well as engaged civilian clergy, represent congregations and communities that embrace and support service members and their loved ones. And so we hope that with that, Chaplain Barnes and Chaplain Lee can share with you some of their perspective from more than 50 years of military service and caring for service members in a variety of both wartime and peacetime settings. So with that, Chaplain Barnes, I'll turn it over to you, and you can let me know when you want to move to the next slide.
Thank you, Chaplain. Thank you, Doctor. It's really a privilege for us to be here and to share with you folks, and we appreciate Dr. Martin, who is both a mentor to Chaplain Lee and myself in providing this opportunity. The next slide.
I am trying here. Let's go ahead.
We have titled our presentation Ministry of Presence, which is a theme that has been underscored and imprinted in all the training of chaplains and chaplain assistants in the United States military. And I get a publication called the MCA, Military Chaplains Association. And just last month, they had an article in there about the Ukrainian military chaplains. and I'm quoting this statement from that article, that the Ukrainian military chaplains, they are standing shoulder to shoulder with their troops across a long front line, 900 miles or more in the trenches of battle, providing religious care, comfort for the wounded, and last rites for the dying. And one of the Ukrainian chaplains made this statement: "My first experience in the trenches proved in the midst of rocket assaults to be the best hour of my priesthood." And I thought that was a valuable statement coming from a colleague, a Catholic priest in Ukraine. Next slide. Dr. Douglas Johnston, who is probably one of the leading scholars, a social worker who has done a lot of interfaith globally, research, writing. And he made this statement in one of his articles, one of his research articles, when he said that the multi-faith experience, extensive interpersonal skills that military chaplains possess are attributes perfectly suited for the inclusion of religion into the stability of an operations. Multi-faith, he goes on to talk about in his article that the chaplains provide interfaith, multi-faith approach to ministering and serving on the battlefield. And he also underscores the importance that chaplains are knowledgeable and have had training around multi-faith experiences, but also understanding all the religions within the world. And there is a course that chaplains in their training progressively, there is a course on world religions that helps them. And I have had one of my chaplains who was deployed, and prior to him leaving, he and I did a tutorial under world religions, which proved to be very helpful for him. Chaplains bring a lot of interpersonal skills to the table because they work with a whole broad range of military people throughout the whole rank structure, and they're suited for helping the institution, the organization, the brigade, the battalion, whatever, to be inclusive of religion and how it helps that understanding and stabilizing them and stabilizing the organization. Next the next slide. Dr. Johnston further states that the military chaplains can develop an in-depth understanding of the religion and culture distinctions in a given environment through their personal interactions with the indigenous communities, as leaders are a critical factor in state organizations. And it's proven true, most of our chaplains that go into a war zone, they often become the designee subject matter expert to work with all the indigenous religious communities in which they are service members in their location. And they often met with that population of religious leaders so they could better work together, collaborate, and understand each other's purpose and mission. So that has been trained very early on in the longevity of these wars over the last 10 years, 20 years, really. Next slide. Chaplain is the best choice. The chaplain is the designated military religious leader. He or she is both developed within the doctrine of the chaplaincy. And we have chaplains of every religious faith, whether rabbis, priests, Islamic, you name it. We have all those different religious representations that serve in units throughout the entire military structure. And they are an advisor to the command or to the commanders. We have direct access to our commander, whether the commander is a captain, a major, a lieutenant colonel, a one-star general, or a four-star general. You have direct access to the commanding leadership, especially in the area of religion, spiritual, ethical, and moral matters. Because in a war zone, the greatest challenge of the war zone is how we respond to the unpredictability of war zones. I remember I had a chaplain colleague of mine who was deployed to Iraq, and she was helicoptered into her unit. A great chaplain, a lieutenant colonel, well trained. As soon as she departed the helicopter, they took her to the morgue. And she had no longer been on the ground, and she was taken there to provide last rites for 6 deceased military service men and women. Some was people of color, some was female, some was Jewish. So she was there to provide that rite of passage, that last rites for those warriors that died on the battlefield. And doing some training for me, in the past, Chaplain Martindale talked about how that moment crystallized for her and reaffirmed for her the unbelievable value and skills that the chaplain brings to the table. So the chaplain as the best choice. Next slide. The chaplain is protected under the privilege of confidentiality of military regulations. The best defense of the chaplaincy and of religious programs in the military is that it preserves a soldier's rights to freely exercise their training. The chaplain makes advice to the leadership on issues of religion, ethics, morale, as affected by religion. I remember I had an episode and a training exercise in which the commander decided he would cancel the chaplain's call, the chaplain's worship on that Sunday because he had more training he wanted to do. And sadly enough, he was a full bird colonel, and at the time I was a captain, and I had to go to him and say to him, "Sir, you can't do that. You cannot deprive your service members of their free expression and to exercise their religious practices." And there was some lengthy conversation, but at the same time, that became a very helpful tutorial for that commander to understand he's the one that has to protect that privilege. The chaplain's the one that helps support that and enforce that. Next slide. The Geneva Accord are silent on whether a chaplain may bear arms. However, the Geneva Accord does state in Article 43.2 in 1977 that the chaplain of the military system are non-combatants. They do not have the right to participate directly in hostilities. In other words, the chaplain is not a trained soldier or trained warrior. A chaplain does not carry a weapon. He or she is protected by the Geneva Accord, the Geneva Conventions on Chaplaincy as non-combatant. We're the only non-combatant service member in the entire military system in, I assume, around the world, but I know in the United States. And one of the ways in which we have helped to insulate and protect the chaplains is that the chaplain is a part of a 2-person team. It's called a UMT, Unit Ministry Team. So every chaplain has a fully qualified, weapon-trained, non-commissioned officer who is a part of their team as a chaplain assistant. And I mentioned earlier Chaplain Martindale. Matter of fact, her chaplain assistant saved her life in Iraq with an IED because he was able to help extract her from the Humvee and get her to a safety zone where she could have probably sustained major injuries or could have died. So they bring tremendous value, not only in the war zone, but they bring tremendous value back at our home stations because they receive some of the same training we do on crisis intervention, on counseling, on helping us conduct and assist in religious services so that the chaplain and the chaplain team can be successful and do what they need to do. And again, I can't underscore enough the UNT, how important they are. The next slide, please. I have in 5 positive outcomes for chaplains and for all service men and women. There's been a lot of research around PDSG, post-traumatic stress growth. There's been a lot of research and a lot of articles written here and a lot of interviews and conversations with previous war veterans, combat veterans who on the other side of their deployment, their engagement, the war zone, they came back as a much more mature and capable person. I had a young chaplain of mine who happened to be a prison chaplain in the federal prison system, which is a unique place to serve. And when he left, he had a degree of he was very theologically trained and chaplain trained, but I was concerned at how he would deal with this experience of war and battlefield. And but this young man came back, and he was so much more mature and informed and confident and capable from that experience. The 12 months that he spent, he was with a brigade, a battalion, mechanized battalion. And he did an unbelievable job, got a tremendous citations from his command. And even when he came back home and went back to work in the all-male federal prison, he realized that his experience over there also helped him as he reconstituted back in that position. And here are some of the common growth indicators for post-traumatic stress growth: appreciation of life, the precious gift of life, personal strength, relationship with others, especially with their immediate family systems or significant others, relationship with others, and new possibilities. Again, my young chaplain went on, was promoted to a lieutenant colonel. He's at a brigade level. He's got about 3 more years to have his 23 years or so, and he's going to retire. But every time I talk to him, I'm not talking to this young chaplain that I sent to the war some 15 years, almost 20 years ago. Very, very capable. New possibilities. Matter of fact, he went back to school when he got out, went back to the prison, and he finished his doctorate in marriage and family systems. And spiritual change. That barometer of our spiritual growth really gets turned up many notches, and we discover unbelievable entrees into spiritual insight and spiritual growth. Empowered and choices and opportunities. Well, that completes my presentation, and I thank you for listening. And now is the Reverend Dr. Chaplain Colonel Retired William Sean Lee.
Chaplain Lee, go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't know if you wanted to say anything, Jim. That's fine.
No, go ahead.
All right. Wanted to thank our colleagues in the Ukraine for asking us to be part of this briefing. Over the years, I first started in Estonia in 1996, then in Bosnia-Herzegovina in 2004, working in developing their chaplain programs. The wing chaplain, when I retired at our Maryland Air National Guard, chaplain Father Vladimir Steliak pastors a Ukrainian Orthodox church that's in Silver Spring, Maryland. And so hearing that it came from you as a group, it was a pull that you were looking for information from us about how clergy might be engaged in support as part of the care team. It was very affirming, and I'm glad to be here. But as Jim said earlier, my heart has been with you. My prayers have been with you because of the casualties of war that you've had to endure, both those who have died and those who have suffered invisible wounds. So, Jim, next slide, please. What I'd like to do is just introduce the topic a bit and look at the clergy and the interdisciplinary group, how to use the initial spiritual assessment, engaging religious resources, and then, as Jim said, some question and answer at the end. What I would like to make clear with you as I begin, though, is the same thing that we approached in Estonia and Bosnia is with you in the Ukraine. It's an honor to share with you what we found useful, but we're not here training because you'll decide what's useful for you. Rather, we're here hoping to make you familiar or to familiarize you with some of the things we've learned and the tools and resources that we've found have been. Next slide. During a deployment, it's, if you will, the soldier deploys to a combat zone, but the family and the loved ones of the soldier deploy in place in their home. And sometimes the family is forgotten when folks think about support. But excuse me. But the soldiers that deploy come home, and the families that have been affected by the deployment with the absence of the soldier, not only do they have to readjust to being with each other, but also in the larger community where they live. And we've found that post-deployment client care for this group is best when it includes a spiritual assessment to try and determine if there's a need for religious support as part of the care plan. And also that if we effectively engage local religious leaders and communities, that can become an essential part of successful care for continuity of care, as it were, for the affected military members and their family members. Next slide, please. Religion and client care. I was particularly happy, as I'd said, that you had asked us how clergy might be included in support of the soldiers and the families and communities. Not always, but sometimes our experience has been that folks don't often think of the religious dimension of care or the spiritual dimension of care. But when we do that, we approach the whole individual. And when we develop a patient care plan and are able to more comprehensively assess and address the patient's concerns. Religion and spirituality, at least here in the United States, my experience has been that people often will confuse religion and spirituality. And I would share with them that while not everyone has a religious community or maybe a particular identity, everyone has a spirituality. If we understand spirituality as what animates life. Now, the translators came back to ask me for some clarification about a life animator. something I would do with the soldiers and their families would be to ask them to think back over the years of some of the best days of their life and to take themselves back and to think about that. It doesn't have to be many, but it may be a few. And I would ask them the questions of who were you with that day? Where were you? What were you doing? And they would describe the day, and I would take some notes. And they would do that for several days. And I would share with them the list of my notes. And in that, they would be surprised often at the life animators they'd forgotten, because those things that made life worth living for them then, in some ways, could be re-engaged now after the return from a combat environment, or welcoming, for the family as they welcome the soldier back. These life animators are how I define spirituality. Is what makes life worth living, what brings life to us. It has an understanding, but it very much has a practice in everyday life. Some also have a religious identity, and that's not to be diminished, because quite often their ability to frame what they've been through in a larger context of meaning and includes the development or the dimension of their religious faith and practice. So again, while not everyone has a particular religious identification, if they do, wonderful. But even if they don't, they have a sense of spirituality about them. So how do we figure out or determine or assess or evaluate what that might be? And we've been using, or I'm retired now, sorry, after 39 years in the military. I guess they're still using it, but what we found useful is an initial spiritual assessment tool. When we bring the team to the table, use this. It's a simple tool, but it can be very useful in diagnosing a patient's requirements for a spiritual or religious support. Next slide, please. So the spiritual assessment. In 1978, it was actually nursing, National Committee for Classification of Nursing Diagnosis. They developed what they called a spiritual diagnosis taxonomy. And it had 3 categories to use for assessing a spiritual diagnosis, as it were. I added a 4th after a conversation with a social worker when I was working in hospice, and that's the initial category, which is spiritual contentment. That's when the individual doesn't express any particular issues. At that point in time, there's nothing that they are aware of struggling with spiritually, so they're fine. And when nursing began their diagnosis was spiritual concern. The reason we added spiritual contentment was a social worker came to me one day after the interdisciplinary prayer group, and she said, not everybody has an issue. We need an extra category. So that's where I had contentment. But for those that do, spiritual concern is an entry-level diagnosis. This is where an individual can identify the issues, but they also are able to identify coping resources that they already possess. So that's spiritual concern. Spiritual distress is when an individual's religious or spiritual resources are not able to help them sufficiently cope. And so they're asking for help to address the issues that they're struggling with. A spiritual despair is when the individual has pretty much abandoned their religious or spiritual practice, and they become a person of disbelief and no longer see these resources as helpful for coping and healing. Because religion and spirituality can be so individual, and sometimes because of that, difficult to identify or ambiguous. I found, and we have found, the spiritual assessment tool is helpful as we begin to look at the whole person and include that as part of the patient or the client's care plan. Next slide, please. There's another aspect of this, however, which is engaging clergy. If you will, as a intake, if it were interview and using an initial spiritual assessment, it is entirely appropriate and acceptable to ask the individual, do you have a particular religious or faith community that you're affiliated with? If they do, jot down the clergy person that represents that community. And it's all right to ask the individual, have you contacted your faith community, or would you like me to contact them as a source of support as we move forward with your care? And that gives them the choice, the opportunity to say yes or no, of course. But not all may have a faith community. However, to be proactive, I won't go into the development of the program, but we started a program that's had some usefulness across the nation, as a matter of fact, called Partners in Care. And what we did is we identified local faith communities. And in Maryland, we had at least one in all 23 counties. That told us that if we had a military member that returned who was requesting religious support, that they would be willing for us to refer them to that local faith community, and they would provide support as best they could with respect to the soldiers' particular religious beliefs. And we already had those contact names, those numbers. So when we would ask the soldier or the family member if they had a particular religious tradition, and if they didn't have a local faith community, we would ask them if they would be interested in having conversations with this local Partner in Care congregation. And that congregation may not identify with the same particular religious background, but we gave some training so they would be able to welcome and have conversations with the soldier and family. And the soldier and family understood that as well. I mean, sometimes we could engage with a particular religious group because we would have that religious denomination in the community, but not always. But having that list ahead of time gave us a referral resource that was ready and present to offer to the client. Be aware, though, that community clergy have varied training and experience and competence in dealing with military members and their family members. And so we had a baseline, basically a training that was not lengthy, but very much essential to make sure that these faith communities understood that the goal was the support of the individual, not to promote their particular religious orientation. So next slide, please. Well, being a bit succinct in talking about these things, again, I appreciate you inviting us to the table, as it were, to talk to you about this. And it's commendable because we have found long-term that the experience of the war will manifest gradually, if you will. Some folks may be able to initially define their issues and their need for support, but you've already had training in moral injury, I know. But as time goes by, we did some studies before I retired and all, and we found out that the presenting issues, while there, changed and became more apparent as time went by. And so one of the things we always valued was continuity of spiritual care. And these faith communities and religious leadership were in the communities long before conflict began, and they'll be there after conflict is done officially. But the reverberations in the community of not just the military member and family, but those who live in the community with them, tend to move and continue to expand over time. So continuity of spiritual care connects the soldier or family member with internal resources and beliefs, either religiously or spiritually, but also with the community. And that's the source of strength for the long-term continuity of care as you invite clergy to the table as part of your interdisciplinary care team. Thank you, Jim. That concludes my comments. I'll turn things back to you.
Jim, can I make a couple of comments?
Please do that, please.
I'd just like to just give you a little history about Chaplain Lee. The Partner in Care program that he was the impetus to start in his state was replicated in my state, in other states. And 2 months after I retired, I went back to work with a contract with the Department of Defense to basically assess that. And it was quite interesting. I visited every National Guard Joint Command headquarters in the United States. And almost 70% of those state headquarters had replicated and picked up on that model that Dr. Chaplain Lee had developed. And things moved slowly in the military, and went until some years later that model slowly began to be introduced to the Department of Defense to the active duty components. So, and what that does, that builds a significant connection between civilian population and military population, which there's a real lack of understanding as well. So I want to just hoo to Dr. Lee for having the vision to put that together.
Thank you, Will. Appreciate that.
Oksana, can we come back to you to address the questions and answers?
Yes, sure. Thank you so much for the lecture. That was fantastic. Thank you. I believe that we do have some practical issues, and I wanted to introduce our audience to ask whatever is meaningful for them, because for sure we do have our circumstances and our specifics, the situations that we are in now. So please, I do invite, and I want to encourage somehow the audience to ask questions.
Can I ask? I have a question because one of the, you mentioned about post-traumatic growth, and one of the domain is spiritual growth, yeah? And for me as military mental health officer, I would say, what can be the sign of spiritual growth? Because sometimes I hear from soldiers like, oh, I start praying a lot. So, but is it because of anxiety, or is it more regarding to spiritual growth, or I feel protected by God? Can I assume this as spiritual growth, or it can be other mechanism in that? Thank you very much.
Well, I heard my father mention this. He was in World War II. He was in Vietnam, and my brother was in Vietnam, and both of them said there were no atheists in the foxhole, which seemed to, for them, their experience was traumatic, was stressful. It changed their life, but they were able to take, as Sean said earlier, to take those pieces of their experience that was growth enhancing and invest that into their life, into their lifestyle. And I think the other key is hearing the stories of other people who've experienced spiritual growth, that had PTSD and was able to work through that through either therapy or support or religious support, and got to a side of growth where then they were able to be a mentor to others who are struggling with it. Sean, you want to add to that?
Unmute here. What I would share is a couple things to consider. One is that, we're keen to watch to see if something is useful for denial or if it's actually helpful. But my experience has been that everyone who faces a combat experience eventually will come to a place where they try and take those experiences and somehow frame them within that larger context of understanding or meaning or religious belief in life, so that they continue to have a life and are able to cope and comfort and find meaning in the days ahead. So all that's to say, it's a process. And if someone uses it to avoid issues, religious issues or whatever, that's one thing. But I move gently with people because sometimes they're in the process of trying to sort it out and understand, not looking for an answer so much as an ability to just accept what they've been through and continue to move on with the business of living life. So that's where I would see the spiritual growth. And that's why I differentiated as well between the religious and the spiritual. They're both important, but they may take on a different expression. I hope that's helpful. Thanks.
No, thank you very much. It makes a lot of meaning. And sometimes I can hear from soldiers, I lost faith. And it can be, and at the same time, it can be also some sign of process and looking for meaning. So when you are not just in some kind of infantility, yeah, so you just expect that you will be taken care, but you found that there is process of refinding the meaning through your own experience. And thank you very much.
Yes, that's one last comment. That's where I was so glad to discover that spiritual taxonomy of spiritual diagnosis that nursing had come up with. At the time, I was working in hospice, and but it was transferable to the military environment. The contentment, the concern, the distress, despair. At least as we move forward, we had some category to begin to see. Were they able to use their skills to cope? Had they abandoned their faith, or were they? So yeah, hopefully that's helpful as you try and US we call it, as we would chart notes. We looked at our problems, goals, and interventions. This diagnosis at least helped us keep the religious and spiritual dimension in the plan of care as we move forward. Thank you.
Так, пан Михайло, у вас питання, будь ласка, ставте його. У вас є можливість.
Михайло, you have a question. You can voice it if you want.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Good day, sirs. My name is Mike. I'm a chaplain of 126th Brigade of Territorial Defense. Yeah, and I have two questions for you. First questions about do exist a model of work of chaplain at the first line of touch with the enemy? Do you understand my question?
Could you repeat that again, please?
Okay. Look, now I'm working at the first and at two line of position of our subdivision. And I want now how the chaplains of USA Army do work in this condition. At yes, is it in this condition? Repeat again.
No, I think I understand now. Oh. If Dr. Barnes is all right, I'll just share a quick few comments and turn it to you as well. Chaplains in the U.S. Army are similar to you in that in the Army, chaplains are assigned to units. In the Air Force, they're assigned to a base, a location. In the Navy, they're assigned to a ship. But for the Army and for the Navy chaplains that serve the Marine Corps, we are also assigned to the unit, similar to what you're describing. And that's where the ministry of presence that Dr. Barnes started to describe becomes so important, because when the soldiers see you, when they're training, when they're engaged in the mission, when they return from the mission, then when issues arise, they feel much more comfortable receiving or opening up to you for support, because you're not someone who's coming in from the outside, but you're one of them in their minds. And so that's quite a, and we consider it a sacred trust, that confidence. And of course, situations are always different, and as are missions, but we would often find most of the time that before the soldiers would go into combat, we would have a time of presence with them. It may be a worship service, it may be a prayer. When they returned, we would be there to be with them following combat. During the remembering, during memorial services, honoring the dead, the essential time to be there. And many times I would spend time at the battalion aid station, which is where they would initially take soldiers who were wounded, or if there was any kind of downtime when the hostile activities cease, that's often a good time to move among the soldiers. And as we're present with them, many times we would have what I used to call a "Hey Chaplain" moment, which is where they would say, "Hey Chaplain, do you have a minute?" And they would talk. So that is how I think that we have similar understanding of the role of chaplaincy. But Dr. Barnes, would you add to that?
Yeah, Dr. Lee, you're right. You don't want to be found with your feet up on a desk in an office somewhere. And I often said to my younger chaplains, my expectation of you is mobility. Wherever soldiers are at, whether the firing range or wherever, in a class, wherever, you make yourself present. Because like you said, if we're present, they all likeliness will approach us. And we'll have some conversation and spiritual help and spiritual care.
Yes, thank you. Thank you first for my first question. It's very similar like in us, in my service. Okay, second questions. Do you planning to event to share to share experience of Ukrainian chaplains in USA education system of chaplains? Do you understand? My English is not good.
Yeah, that's fine. My Ukrainian is non-existent, so I appreciate your ability to communicate. If I heard you correctly, you were asking if we were planning any kind of an event where we would share experiences. When I think there's something already in place, and I'll, as I share, when I mentioned being in Estonia from 1996 till my retirement in 2018, we would back and forth with missions to help the chaplains, and they would come and be with us. And with the Bosnia military, Bosnia-Herzegovina, from May of 2014, those were both part of what's called the Partners for Peace program, I believe. I see, gosh, I've been out 5 years and my brain is emptying. But the gist of this is that there are partnerships for peace, partnerships that are set up between states in the United States and particular countries around the world. And there is such an arrangement, I believe, that between the United States state called Georgia and the Ukraine, that they would come over to be with us, and some of the folks from Georgia chaplains would go over. And so while we do not have anything planned, I think that perhaps if you checked, there's probably already a partnership relationship between the chaplains in, I believe it's the state of Georgia and the Ukraine, excuse me. And one of the chaplains in Estonia, who's an Orthodox priest and has become a good personal friend. I know he has been back and forth to the Ukraine several times. His name is Chaplain Ivar Serapik, and perhaps his name sounds familiar. He is very familiar with what we do. And I know that he would be that's the one name I remember, Chaplain Ivar Serapik. He would be very much a useful resource as well. So the state partnership, that's what it was called, State Partnership Program. It took me a while, my brain to recall. I've started the shift to being a civilian. There you go. The State Partnership Program.
Right,
I believe the United States state of Georgia had been very active with you. So check on that. And also Chaplain Serapik, he lives in Tallinn in Estonia. And I know because when we were working with him over those 20 plus years, there were times he would say I was in the Ukraine. And so there's that opportunity there.
What I'll try to do, I'll reach out to the National Guard Bureau and I'll see if they have a directory that has a breakdown of every state that's partnered with every international country. And I'll get that to Dr. Martin and he can send that to you people over there. Does that make sense, Sean?
Yeah, it sure does. It sure does. I don't trust my
Yeah.
memory.
Thank you very much. Thank you for answers. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, I wanted to encourage our audience to ask questions now that we have this opportunity. Now when the audience is thinking, could I ask mine? Chaplain Lee, that was about the issue that you touched upon. That was about the connection between moral injury and the service, right? The chaplains are ready to provide soldiers, military servicemen with. Could you please just give a couple of, ideas about that point? Thank you so much.
I will offer an answer, but I would like to defer that to Chaplain Barnes because he is more of the subject matter expert in moral injury and chaplains than I am. So Chaplain Barnes, would you answer that question?
Well, recently moral injury, it's post-traumatic stress disorder has been around for, Dr. Martin knows that better than me, for many years. But moral injury is a fairly new discovery and identification within our society. And so there's been a lot of training, a lot of writings, a lot of books on that. But moral injury has to do much more with a wound of the soul of that person's spiritual center. And it has to do with the conflict that evolves around their spiritual center and what they've experienced in the military or on the battlefield. And so there's great disturbance within their heart and mind and even their spirituality. And people who've suffered from moral injury, we have developed techniques and ways in which through religious practices and support groups and other ways in which they can have conversation with other colleagues about what's been happening with their woundedness and where they can share their insights and discoveries and how they have hopefully tried to get a handle on that and get to the other side. I could, Jim, I don't know. Maybe I could send a book list of some of the great books, or you could, or we could, out there that's been written by some folks in that field that might be helpful, but it'd have to be translated or where people can.
Oksana, I know Kyle had to leave. I'm going to be talking with him on Monday, and he and I can talk about putting together. There literally is a lot of literature on this topic, way too much. And I think, we've given one lecture already, but I think we can put together some other materials that might be useful and not overwhelming around these issues, especially with the focus on, if you will, moral injury associated with combat.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, Carl has given us a webinar and it was really fantastic. But
Carl and I will talk some more about that. And again, there may be resources that you can then post that are easily translated into Ukrainian. Some may already have been translated, and we'll look to see if we can do that.
Super. Thank you.
The only comment I would make that, cuts across all of what we've been talking about this morning is I think the role of the chaplain, the role of clergy, the role of others in faith communities in helping to provide and sustain hope. Hope being the sort of issue that at some point I will be able to return and do, life in a different way. And so in the context of what's experienced by many soldiers in combat, is this issue of loss of hope, loss of meaning, especially important, other work I'm currently doing, especially important with those combat casualties who have lost limbs, who have had their life dramatically changed, and thinking about what will happen going forward. How do they maintain and retain a sense of hope? And it's often the members of the clergy present in these settings, in these hospitals, in these rehabilitative centers that allow the veteran a chance to talk and express their concerns and begin working on how do we build hope for the future. So again, we'll come back to that theme.
Thank you. I saw that we have a question in Q&A section. I will read it in Ukrainian because it is in Ukrainian, but our interpreters will help to translate. Чи існує в армії США співпраця капеланів?
If in the USA Army there is any collaboration between chaplains, psychologists, and psychiatrists, and how are competences distributed and duties, and whether psychologists support chaplains?
If I understand the question correctly, the collaboration can happen. It doesn't always happen, but generally the chaplains that are behind the lines are where that conversation might happen more often, though not always. I mean, we did have and still do have the teams that will go out to do interventions in the combat areas, and they the military psychologists and psychiatrists, most of them understand the role of the chaplain and very much appreciate having us there. And most chaplains understand that while what we do may be therapeutic, we are not therapists, and so we know the essential need for those who are psychologists and psychiatrists and mental health providers and the mental health social work, the whole team to be there. There's I'm laughing because when I worked in the civilian environment at hospice, and there was more of a let me put this. Sometimes folks became more territorial, I'll put it that way, around their role. And you couldn't step over that line. In the military, because of the nature of the threat environment, we come to love and appreciate each other quickly for what we bring to the table. And most often in conversations, have the conversation with the intent of what's in the best interest of the soldier. What do we need to do to pull things together? So we work much better as a team. I truly miss that environment, being retired now after all these years, because it's quite wonderful to work with a team, as a team.
Let me add a comment here. Having been part of the mental health team associated with military operations, we have many fewer psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers in our military units, they are, in a sense, further back from the actual line combat units. And it's much more likely that the chaplain, and we have many more chaplains because every battalion in the Army or the same for the other services has a member of the clergy, a chaplain. And so they are the front line provider, if you will, of what I call psychological first aid. And chaplains are typically very good at helping to identify those service members who need to move beyond that unit caring and support into some type of professional care, meaning social work, psychology, psychiatry, moving to the, if you will, the mental health part of the military structure. So if you think about those relationships, every mental health provider values the role of the chaplain being that first line gatekeeper. And so there's often lots of contact back and forth. Part of the reason why I know Chaplain Barnes and Chaplain Lee in my own work, working with veterans in the United States, has been in the engagement of our mental health system with members of the clergy, both military members and civilian members. And so from a mental health perspective, they are highly valued assets of our military units.
Yeah, maybe we could also say that we've grown a lot in that aspect to maybe what chaplains were seeing or how they were used many, many years ago. But there's such a collaboration now, and there's a sense of having a team within your ministry, and we have good professionals out there. In marriage and family, social work, psychology, psychiatry. So, and the military has done a good job at trying to do better training of that, I think, at the chaplain school, and likewise. So hopefully we're a little bit at a better place, but I appreciate what you just said, because you know that better than any of us with your tenure and your journey.
Дякую за відповідь. У нас ще два питання.
Thank you for your response. And we have two more questions in Q&A. Volodymyr is asking the following. Dear sirs, could you share some experience of helping a soldier overcome despair, the state of despair, and what is the key approach there?
Looking at the taxonomy, contentment, concern, distress, and despair. As you know, despair is when the soldier has pretty much abandoned their faith system or their spirituality as a resource that helps them cope. Hopefully, we had picked up on symptoms as it progressed to despair, but sometimes we don't. And so reason I'm bringing that up is there is a place where the ownership has to be requesting, if you will. We will, what I would do with someone in despair is just come alongside, helps the most, not push anything, but just come alongside and let them know if you want to talk with a chaplain, it will stay with us. It will go no further, that privileged communication, but you may not want to. But, and I've shared with them before, I hope maybe one day we can have a conversation about the things that used to be very meaningful to you from your faith, and listen for their stories. So the spiritual despair, there's not a trick or a treatment or it's individual, based on the individual. Most of the time, they've been traumatized to the point where it's just not when they want to have that conversation. But if we have the relationship through ministry of presence, they're more likely, as we continue to repeat, as it were making the rounds, that when it's time to have that conversation, what we would do is meet them where they are, listen to their story, try and understand where the impact began to be diminished in their experience. Again, refer to mental health because there's a need for the team approach on this. So in an interdisciplinary group, I would definitely let the rest of the team know, hey, this is what I'm seeing. And many times they'll help by saying at an appropriate time, hey, why don't you talk to the chaplain? Maybe now's the time, and work with the team. I hope that's helpful.
Great point, Sean. Yeah, I can share a brief story because what we do in all components, I think, of the military, I know in the Army, we have mandatory suicide training for every person in uniform. And I remember we had an episode on a drill weekend where a female soldier came in and talked to her squad leader that one of her battle buddies, one of her other male soldier friends, had a gun in his vehicle and had been talking some kind of strange conversation. So she told her immediate supervisor, squad leader, and that got pushed up, and intervention was done that day. And very fortunate because there was serious level of intentionality by that young soldier, and between the chaplain, between the commander, between mental health, we were able to get him at a safe place so he could kind of decompress and find a healthier spot. So, and I don't know if Ukraine, if they in the military there have mandatory or training or for their military, but that's proven to be, I think, a helpful intervention in the at least in the Army.
Thank you. Так, наступне питання у нас в секції Q&A.
Next question in Q&A. Some non-professional soldiers speak about lack of freedom in the army, that one needs to obey the orders. And they speak about that as the greatest challenge for those who are civilians, for volunteer soldiers. How is it possible to prevent that issue, to deal with it from the standpoint of a chaplain?
This might give you a chuckle or a laugh. I remember once when I was a young chaplain and had a supervisory chaplain, we worked together in the unit, and it was called a division support command. And so had a soldier come to him and said, you know, chaplain, I don't want to be here. I don't want to do what they're telling me to do. And I'm gonna leave, be absent without leave. The chaplain listened to him and asked him why and talked with him. And his final comment to him was, look, you signed up, you have to do what you're told. And if I have to stay, you have to stay too. And that sounded humorous, but later on, I understood that what he was saying is, I understand your struggles, but we need to be here for a reason that's larger than ourselves. And so let's keep that focus, and we'll move forward together. I really appreciated his candor because it allowed him to come alongside the soldier and not criticize him, but rather say, I understand. However, there's a larger commitment that we're part of here. And so that's that would be my my offer. Or someone once said, if you go to work for the mail system, sooner or later you're going to have to deliver mail, and so you need to stay and keep doing what you signed up to do.
Mm-hmm.
And another possibility, I know something I've always tried to encourage soldiers to do is to identify somebody in their unit that they have kind of respect for and approachable, to find a mentor, somebody else in the unit that are on parallel to where they are, but exhibits more confidence and certainty, and to seek out a mentor which they can confine in and have some conversation in, so that some things could be said, just like Chaplain Lee said. And soldiers have that ability, I think, to mentor one another, and that not only happens in the daily operation of being a soldier, but it happens, we know, on the battlefield. Yeah.
I might mention that, this is not unique to what's happening in Ukraine. It's true of every nation where individuals are being, if you will, drafted, or in a sense, involuntarily being forced to enter military service. That's a big adaptation. And there are some that will find it very, very difficult. It becomes a real challenge for leadership, especially at the small unit level, sergeants and captains, if you will, to provide ways of helping to motivate and address those issues, to recognize, as Chaplain Lee has described, I think very nicely, that many of us don't want to be here for a whole host of reasons, but there are issues bigger than ourselves that we need to try to identify with. And often it's the esprit de corps and the association with other soldiers in a unit that will help people, if you will, get through that difficult challenge of not wanting to be there. And they may have many reasons. They may have family members and loved ones at home that they're worried about. But it's, as I say, a real challenge for the unit leader, and it's one of the roles that chaplains play in advising unit leaders, as Chaplain Lee described earlier, in a sense being the conscience of the unit. So it's, again, there's no magical answer here, but it really is about developing that sense within the small group of being a commitment to one another and a commitment to some issues that are bigger than ourselves. And for some, that's not going to work. And we know what the consequences of that might be.
Thank you. Пане Михайло, ви хотіли поставити ще одне питання?
Mihailo, you also wanted to ask another question. You're welcome.
Пане Михайло, чуєте?
Can you hear us?
Okay, thank you for. I have one question. What's the role of applicants in the burial institution in the U.S. Army? Thank you.
Thank you for your patience.
Burial.
Could you say that once more, please?
Burial, поховання, да.
Maybe the interpreter.
Burial. This is the burial. How chaplains contribute to burial.
As Chaplain Barnes shared, there's three, if you will, foundation stones for military chaplaincy in the United States, and that's to nurture the living, to care for the wounded, and then to honor the dead. And in a combat theater, chaplains are very much engaged in that. Many times, if there's a time when we used to have the bodies that were flown back, and there would be what they called a ramp ceremony in theater, and it would be a brief time to acknowledge the loss with the unit there, as well as to honor the soldier that's no longer there. So chaplains, are engaged in that aspect, but also a resource we didn't, maybe we did talk about, but the military chaplains that come back to the community from their deployment, they'll also need to have support as well. But they'll also be a tremendous resource to help community clergy understand around services that may be provided in the community congregation or nearby, can give an understanding to the community clergy of just what the effect this has on the soldiers. So one of the basic things we're to do is to honor the dead. And some of that can happen in theater, in the combat zone, and also back in the civilian environment for the families to see when we have particular ceremonies when veterans die, and it's often very, very meaningful to the family when they hear taps played, the bugle, and the flags presented to the senior family member. There are a lot of tears that are healing tears. They're good. They're, but it really brings home to them without even saying something, the aspect of the service that's been rendered here, that someone's laid down their life for their country and for their friends. Will, would you want to add to that?
Yeah, there's a service in the military. It's called the notification team. And when there's been a death, whether in country or out of country, and there has to be a notification to the immediate family, that notification team is a chaplain and a non-commissioned officer. And we go as a chaplain to be present. The notification officer does the notification, and we do the comfort to the family at the moment of hearing that notification. And I think for me, I mean, in the 20 plus years, that was one of the most humbling and I think holy and religious and holy events I'd ever experienced. I remember the first notification, he and I parked the car on the opposite side of the street. We got out, we were in our dress blues, and the house was across the street from us. And there was someone standing, it's a big bay window, and somebody was standing there and saw us get out of the car. And I think it was a sister. And by the time we got to the doorsteps, the mother and the father had already came out, and they kind of knew what had happened. But and that happens every day in every home, not every home, but any home in the country where there's been a loved one who has been killed in a foreign place. The notification team will contact that family within 24 hours or less.
Let me just mention, if we back up a little bit and we think about casualties, deaths that occur in a combat unit in the war zone where active fighting is going on. Often that unit will take a moment to remember, recognize, and honor their lost colleagues. And chaplains are quite aware in these units of the importance of not, if you will, taking over the ceremony, but rather finding ways of helping the peers, the battle buddies, express their loss in that moment. And so in many ways, the chaplain is the orchestra leader who helps them have an opportunity to say something about their fallen comrades. And to provide a presence and a, if you will, sacramental honor to that immediate ceremony. And those soldiers often have to return to combat, within hours, if not minutes. And so it's important that we recognize that idea of dealing with grief in that during that active kind of combat role. And the challenge that soldiers have of shifting from that grief into their combat responsibilities. I will be talking with Oksana later about a particular presentation that we hope to give in the future, where a former U.S. military commander who has had casualties in combat talks about the way the unit deals with and expresses grief during the midst of active combat operations. So that's one of the things that we will try to organize for the future.
Thank you. Так, наступне питання в секції Q&A. Володимир питає,
So next question from Volodymyr. What about humor and jokes? Which role does it play in your service?
My experience has been that humor, joking can be very helpful. It's the timing that's important as to when it's appropriate. Not to avoid looking at something that's difficult, but sometimes the chaplains in the units are the folks who are significant contributors to the morale. And many times we'll use humor as a way to help folks relax and feel a little more comfortable about dealing with difficult things. And even if there's not a problem behind it, we have something in the United States we call dad jokes, where the teenagers say that dads always have these jokes that are funny, but our teenagers will shake their heads. The older I got, the more I realized just how young the soldiers were. I used to be young and wasn't, and sometimes you'd tell the joke and they'd laugh and say, "Thanks, Chaplain. It sounds like a dad joke, but I appreciate it. I needed that." So we use it to help support morale. In difficult situations, I don't use humor much unless I'm really feel that it will help the soldier process what they're going through, not to avoid issues. But for morale, oh yeah, nothing better than a chaplain with a good sense of humor, as long as it's used to help open the doors, not gloss over issues.
That's a great remark.
Sometimes you can use that and use yourself as the joke. I mean, I've gone in and met with the chief of staff or something or whatever, and I'd come out and somebody said, "Well, Chaplain, they go okay?" So I said, "Not really." I said, "I got my butt chewed out." And they found that, I think, comforting, because they may have been in there themselves and had their butt chewed out. So, yeah, got to take it on the chin. And I agree with chaplains have a way of kind of inserting the levity at the right time at the right place, and it's a good therapeutic tool, I think. Yeah.
It seems that we have run out of questions by now. Probably half a minute we will wait. If anybody wants to ask anything. Шановна аудиторія, останні хвилинки, якщо є ще бажання спитати, поставити питання, будь ласка. Так, схоже, це все. I just wanted to thank you again and again and again. Thank you so much. We've been waiting for you for so long. We have had so many requests to invite chaplains, so I'm really grateful to you, both lecturers, and also to Jim, to you, and to Carl, of course. And I wanted to say big thanks to our interpreters who has helped us so much today, as usual. That was fantastic, really. I'm not a very religious person, but I was listening to you, and you sound so comforting, and thank you. I'm sure that this lecture will be watched again and again, and people will find their comfort listening to you. Thank you.
It was wonderful to be here. Thank you for the opportunity, and you're in our thoughts and prayers.
Thank you.
Likewise,
thank you so
we extend the same. Thank you for who you are, and thank you for your homeland, for your warriors, for your elected officials. And I'll just extend to you, anytime you want to come to North Carolina, my wife and I live on the coast, got some water right out in front of our house. It can be a free vacation. And we just entertained the guest about a month ago. My wife, her colleague, I did nursing school together 30-something years ago. She came and spent 4 days with us, and we had a great time. So you got an open invitation.
Thank you so much.
Let me thank Chaplain Lee and Chaplain Barnes for stepping up and offering this presentation. And Oksana, again, we're honored to just be present among all of you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Our closing remark, I reference a verse in the scriptures of the Bible, of the Christian faith. And the writer says, "May God watch between you and me while we're absent from one another." Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.
We'll sign off. Thank you, everyone.